Welcome back to another explainer. Look, if you're anything like me, you probably started your day today with a very specific, deeply cherished morning ritual. A hot, steaming mug of coffee. It's that beautiful dark liquid that shakes off the sleep, sharpens the mind, and gets us ready to tackle the day. But we rarely stop to think about the epic, continent-spanning historical adventure that brought those roasted beans right into our kitchens. Well, today we're going to trace that exact journey.
But really think about it for a second. Have you ever actually wondered where coffee came from? We're so used to the daily grind, grabbing a cup on the way to work, hitting the button on our espresso machines, that it kind of feels like it's just always been here. But how did this little bean transform into a worldwide obsession? The answer is a massive mystery that begins centuries ago, far, far away from the modern cafes we know today.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the history, we first need to grasp the sheer scale of coffee today. Billions of people, literally billions, start their morning with a cup of coffee every single day. That's enough to fill an unbelievable amount of swimming pools, honestly. It fuels busy cities, it powers our workplaces, and it brings friends together across the globe. It is essentially a universal language. And to understand how we got to this massive global scale, we need to map out the journey. Looking at the big picture, the global timeline looks a little something like this. From serious cultivation in 15th century Yemen to its explosive arrival in Europe in the 17th century, its crucial role as the ultimate fuel for the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries, all the way to massive 20th century global expansion. But before we hit the 15th century, we need to zoom in and go back even further in time.
Section 1. The Ethiopian Legend and the Spark of Discovery.
So our story actually begins more than 1,000 years ago, high up in the lush, beautiful highlands of Ethiopia. According to a very famous, somewhat whimsical legend, we owe our mornings to a goat herder named Kaldi. Kaldi noticed something incredibly unusual about his flock. After munching on some bright red berries from a specific tree, his goats became unusually energetic. Actually, scratch that. They weren't just energetic, they were practically bouncing off the walls. Curious, Kaldi decided to try these mysterious berries himself, and suddenly, he experienced that exact same familiar burst of energy we all know and love. Word of this magical plant spread like wildfire, and local monks figured out that they could use these berries to stay awake during long, grueling hours of prayer. Now, while the story of Kaldi might just be a fun legend, historians absolutely agree on the core fact. Ethiopia is the true, undisputed origin point of coffee.
Section 2. Expansion, Arabia, and the Middle East.
From the Ethiopian highlands, coffee began its really remarkable journey across the world, crossing the Red Sea by the 15th century and stepping into a brand new era on the Arabian Peninsula. Specifically, it landed in Yemen. And this is a huge milestone for us today. Yemen is where the coffee trade as an industry truly kicked off. Up until this point, people were mostly just consuming the berries, but the people of Yemen innovated. They developed the methods for actually roasting and brewing the coffee beans that completely transformed it. The beverage they created is what closely resembles the dark, roasted drink you and I consume today.
Once they figured out how to brew it, coffee's popularity absolutely exploded throughout the Middle East. In major bustling cities like Mecca, Cairo, and Istanbul, something entirely new appeared: the coffee house. These became vital social centers almost overnight. People gathered to talk politics, conduct business deals, share groundbreaking ideas, and just enjoy some entertainment. Because these coffee houses were such incredible hubs for spreading knowledge and sparking deep conversation, they earned a highly revered nickname: the Schools of the Wise.
Section 3. Conflict and Triumph in Europe. Of course, a drink this powerful wasn't going to stay a local secret for long. Traders began packing these precious beans and carrying them across continents. By the 17th century, the coffee bean finally made its way to the shores of Europe, but the reception was, well, let's just call it a little complicated. While the Middle East revered coffee as the schools of the wise, many Europeans were highly suspicious of this strange, very dark, bitter beverage. It was foreign, it was strong, and it kept you wide awake. It sparked so much fear that some people literally called it the bitter invention of Satan. It's hilarious to think about now, right? The very thing that gets us through a Monday morning was once viewed as highly suspicious.
So, the crucial point is that human curiosity, and let's be honest, the undeniable biological effects of caffeine, quickly overcame that initial fear. Once people actually tasted coffee and felt its stimulating effects for themselves, demand absolutely skyrocketed. Just like in the Middle East, coffee houses sprouted up rapidly in major cities like London, Paris, and Vienna. They became the ultimate gathering places for the brightest minds, writers, philosophers, scientists, merchants, you name it. Many historians actually believe that the conversations held over these very cups of coffee directly fueled the major intellectual movements that completely transformed Europe and shaped the modern world. Coffee was quite literally waking up society.
Section 4. The Global Machine, Colonization and Industry. As demand continued to surge across Europe, a new problem popped up. They needed more coffee, a lot more. This brings us to a really dramatic shift in our story, where coffee moves from a regional specialty to a massive, industrial-scale global machine. European powers began desperately seeking ways to grow coffee themselves so they could control the supply. This plant literally conquered the globe through sheer demand. Coffee plants were packed onto ships and transported across oceans to colonies in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The Dutch took it and successfully cultivated it down in Indonesia, the French brought it all the way across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, and the Portuguese established massive coffee plantations in Brazil. In a relatively short amount of time, coffee was taking root all over the planet.
And out of all of those massive global expansions, one nation stood out at number one. Among all the coffee-producing countries that emerged during this era of rapid colonization, Brazil eventually became the world's absolute largest producer of coffee. And what's truly astonishing about this historical expansion is that Brazil still proudly holds that number one position today.
No way, right? After all this time?
Fast forward a bit to the 18th and 19th centuries, and coffee experienced another massive evolution. Thanks to major advances in transportation and agriculture, coffee went from being a luxury product meant only for the elite to a totally affordable everyday beverage for ordinary people. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. As industrialization spread rapidly, workers were facing grueling, super long shifts in factories. Coffee basically became the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. Workers relied on it just to stay alert. The drink became intrinsically linked to productivity, to energy, and to the very rhythm of modern working life.
Section 5. The Modern Ritual and a Global Coffee Culture. Moving smoothly into the 20th century and the world we actually recognize today, we enter the era of the modern ritual. Huge global companies emerged, bringing totally new brewing methods and endless flavors to the masses, firmly establishing coffee shops as the places we go to work, study, socialize, or just relax. Today, coffee is consumed in nearly every country on Earth, but the way we drink it is beautifully unique. Now, what's really interesting here is looking at how diverse this is. In Italy, throwing back a quick, bold espresso is a sacred daily ritual. In Turkey, the intricate preparation of the coffee is considered an absolute art form. And back where the whole shebang began, down in Ethiopia, traditional, hours-long coffee ceremonies remain a deeply central, vital part of community life. Same bean, entirely different, rich cultural expressions.
Modern coffee is so much more than just a beverage now. It is a staggering global industry worth billions and billions of dollars, supporting the livelihoods of millions of farmers, workers, and businesses worldwide. But here is the beautiful takeaway for us. Despite all of our amazing technological advances, and despite the constantly changing trends from cold brews to specialty artisan pour-overs, the basic, fundamental appeal of coffee hasn't changed one bit. It does exactly what it did in the schools of the wise centuries ago. It brings people together, it sparks lively conversations, and it provides a quiet, reliable moment of comfort in our hectic everyday lives.
From a whimsical, legendary discovery with dancing goats in the misty mountains of Ethiopia, to becoming one of the most beloved and essential drinks on the entire planet, coffee has traveled an utterly extraordinary path through human history. So, when you take your next sip of coffee tomorrow morning, will you taste the centuries of history floating in your cup? Remember that you aren't just drinking caffeine. You are enjoying a story that spans continents, cultures, and centuries. Every single mug contains a small piece of one of the most fascinating journeys in human history. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.